Ethan, you can't park your truck there again. Vivian Clark's voice cut through the warm morning air like a sudden gust of cold wind. I didn't look up from the driveway where my aging Ford sat, tires inches from the edge of the sidewalk. Vivian, I'm parked off the sidewalk by nearly half a foot. It's not blocking anything. She took a step forward, folding her arms tightly. Rules are rules. It's a safety hazard, and you're in violation of the neighborhood code. I'm afraid a fine will be coming your way. The irritation I'd been holding back snapped loose. Fine? You hand out fines like candy, but I'm the only one you're targeting. What about those cars down the street parked way worse? No notices, no fines, just me. Vivian's eyes flicked toward the street, as if to measure the damage, but she didn't deny it. Instead, her voice dropped, heavy with authority and disdain. Because you challenge me. I clenched my jaw. You want a challenge? Fine. I'm Ethan Myers. I straightened, meeting her gaze steadily. I'm a civil engineer, and I designed that sidewalk you're so worried about. It's up to code and perfectly safe. She blinked, caught off guard for a brief second. I pressed on. That security camera, the one pointed right at your office window, it feeds into my personal server. I wrote the firmware myself. So don't try telling me you don't know what's going on. She stiffened, clearly surprised by my knowledge of the neighborhood's tech. That doesn't give you the right to defy the HOA. I smiled, bitter and tight. You think this neighborhood is yours to control? You're wrong. I shifted my gaze away, toward the backyard where an old oak tree stood sentinel over the weathered bench my grandfather had built decades ago. It was more than just a bench. It was a sanctuary of memory. I could almost hear my dad's laugh echoing in the breeze, see the way sunlight filtered through those leaves during lazy summer afternoons. My grandfather planted that tree with his own hands. It was the last gift he left me before he passed, a symbol of the family's roots in this place. Losing him 2 years ago had been hard, but this bench kept him alive for me, a silent witness to the passing years. This wasn't just about parking tickets or petty HOA rules. It was about preserving that legacy, about protecting a piece of family history the HOA had no right to touch. I shifted back to Vivienne. Listen, I'm not some guy to be bullied, and this property isn't up for your taking. Vivian's jaw tightened. She turned sharply on her heel and stalked away, but I caught the flicker of frustration in her eyes. I exhaled slowly and turned toward the house. The day had only just begun, but I knew this fight was going to be long and hard. I pulled out my phone and spoke directly into the camera. Hey, I'm Ethan Myers. If you're watching this, drop a comment. Tell me where you're tuning in from. And if you want to see how I deal with these neighborhood bullies, hit subscribe. This story's just getting started. I glanced back toward the oak bench, the sun painting golden patterns across the weathered wood. That bench held every secret conversation I'd ever had with my dad, every moment of quiet comfort. I wasn't about to let some HOA queen wipe it out with their rules and their fines. I had a plan, but it wasn't going to be easy. The next time Vivienne came knocking, I'd be ready. I took out my phone, voice steady but low. This is Ethan. If you're watching, tell me, where are you tuning in from? The next move's coming, and it's not what Vivian expects. The moment Vivian walked away, I knew the fight was far from over. The fine she threatened? It arrived in my mailbox 3 days later. Neatly printed, cold as a stone. $150.00 for unauthorized parking. I stared at the paper, the words feeling like a slap. But it wasn't the money, it was the principle. That little fine wasn't about safety or rules, it was about control. About making me feel small in the place my family had called home for generations. That afternoon, I found myself standing on the sidewalk, eyes scanning the neighborhood like a detective on a stakeout. There, 2 houses down, another truck blocked the sidewalk completely, tires squatting like a beast, no notes slapped on the windshield. No HOA warning in sight. I raised my phone, snapped a quick photo, and sent it off to Vivian with a short message. Equal enforcement, please. No reply. Later, at the HOA board meeting, I spoke up again. The room smelled like stale coffee and polished ambition. Vivian sat front and center, her lips pursed in practiced calm. Selective enforcement undermines trust, I said, voice steady but charged. I'm not here to break rules, I'm here to ask for fairness. A few heads nodded, but Vivian's glare cut through the room like a razor. We enforce the rules to keep this community safe and beautiful, she said, voice smooth but sharp. Anyone who thinks otherwise is simply misunderstanding. Misunderstanding. That word hit me hard. Afterward, a few neighbors came up to thank me quietly. Some looked fearful, others hopeful. The tension in the air was thick, like static before a storm. But this wasn't just about me. It was about the community feeling the pressure of Vivian's iron grip. That night, sitting on the porch with my daughter, Lily, I watched her play near the oak bench. Her laughter was a sharp contrast to the cold, legalistic world that was creeping in around us. "I want to have my birthday party here," she said, eyes bright, "with balloons and music." I swallowed the knot tightening in my throat. HOA noise restrictions meant no loud parties past 9 p.m. Last year, a similar gathering had been shut down. "I'll make sure we can," I promised, but I wasn't sure how. The next morning brought another notice, this time for unauthorized lawn decorations. Christmas lights apparently still considered a violation, months after the holidays. The language was vague, but the intent clear. Squeeze until I gave in. This was no accident. It was a deliberate pressure campaign. I called my sister Maria, who'd grown up here too. She understood the stakes. Dad fought against this kind of power when he was alive. He'd want you to stand tall. Her words settled something inside me. This wasn't just a property dispute. It was a family legacy, a battle for the soul of the neighborhood. I decided to document everything, meticulously logging notices, emails, and conversations. The idea was simple: build a paper trail so thick no one could deny the harassment. Days later, I caught Vivienne watching me from across the street, clipboard in hand, calculating every move. That smirk, like she knew she had me trapped. But I wasn't about to back down. Instead, I started talking to neighbors, quietly gathering stories of their own run-ins with Vivian and the HOA. Some had been fined for leaving garbage cans out too long, others threatened over paint colors. A pattern emerged: selective enforcement, heavy-handed intimidation, a community fractured by fear. By the end of the week, I realized this wasn't just about me or my truck. It was about standing up to a power that had gone unchecked for too long. At my kitchen table, surrounded by printed notices and legal pamphlets, I made a vow. This fight would be about fairness and respect, no matter how long it took. And it wouldn't just be me. It would be all of us. After weeks of quietly rallying neighbors and collecting HOA notices, I knew I wasn't alone, but I still needed more than whispers and nods. I needed proof, hard evidence. Mark Shelton was the first neighbor I'd caught looking uneasy during one of those tense board meetings. An older guy, longtime resident and one of Vivian's closest allies on the HOA. But lately something was off. He'd start a sentence, then stop, glance away, his hands twitching like he was holding back more than words. I found him one evening watering his lawn, just as the sun dipped low, the neighborhood bathed in a soft amber glow. I called out, trying to sound casual. "Mark, got a minute?" He looked up, startled, then nodded slowly. "Yeah, Ethan, what's up?" We stood there in the quiet street, the hum of cicadas filling the gaps between our words. "I know you see what's going on," I said, lowering my voice. "It's not right. Vivian's tactics, the fines, the intimidation." He hesitated, eyes darting nervously toward his house, then back at me. "You think I don't want to say something? Believe me, it's been killing me. But Vivian, she's got a grip on the board. People are scared of what'll happen if they speak. I get it, fear's powerful. But what if you're the one who breaks it?" Mark rubbed the back of his neck, exhaling sharply. "I've seen her using the master key to get into people's properties, without notice, without permission, not just for maintenance either. I overheard her telling another board member to make examples of some homeowners. It's illegal." My pulse quickened. This wasn't just harassment or overreach. It was trespassing, abuse of power. "Any proof?" I asked quietly. He looked around, voice dropping to a whisper. "Emails between Vivian and a few board members. Plans to tighten control, intimidate homeowners into submission. I can't just hand them over openly, but I can get them to you, quietly." Relief and dread tangled in my chest. Relief that someone inside was willing to help. Dread at the risk he was taking. "Whatever you need from me," I said. "I'll protect you." Mark nodded, eyes glistening with unshed emotion. Thanks, Ethan. I don't know how long I can keep this up. That night, I replayed our conversation over and over. Mark's fear was real, but his courage? It was a crack in the armor Vivienne had built around herself. Over the next few days, Mark and I exchanged encrypted emails. I'd get fragments, screenshots, scanned letters, cryptic notes. The pieces started forming a disturbing picture. The HOA was systematically weaponizing rules, using legal threats to silence homeowners and crossing lines that no governing board should. Meanwhile, Vivienne's behavior grew more erratic. She'd show up unannounced at neighbors' homes, checking fences, lawns, even peering through windows. She didn't even bother to hide her disdain when caught. One afternoon, I spotted her near my place, pacing by the old oak bench. The wind stirred its leaves, shadows dancing on the weathered wood. That bench had witnessed years of family memories. Now it felt like a battleground marker. I called out, "Vivienne, what are you doing here?" She straightened, lips curling in a thin smile. "Just making sure everyone's following the rules." Rules? Or trying to intimidate? I stepped forward, voice firm. Her smile faded. "Watch your tone, Ethan." Before I could answer, my phone buzzed. An encrypted message from Mark. "Check the mailbox tonight." That evening, I found a thick envelope hidden beneath my welcome mat. Inside were printouts of email threads between Vivienne and the HOA board, discussing covert plans to use the master key, impose fines strategically, and silence dissenters. The weight of it hit me like a freight train. This wasn't petty neighborhood squabbles anymore. It was a calculated campaign against anyone who dared question Vivienne's authority. I sat on the porch near the oak bench, leafing through the documents as the night deepened around me. The creak of the wood beneath me, the rustle of branches, it all reminded me of how much this place meant, not just to me, but to the whole community. Somewhere deep down, I knew this was only the beginning. If Vivienne thought she could bully us into silence, she'd underestimated what legacy and truth could ignite. If you've ever felt pushed around by those who think power gives them the right to silence others, you know this fight isn't just mine. Tell me, where are you watching from? Because what comes next, it's going to change everything. The moment I read Mark's message, "Vivienne's here. Master key fail. Call 911. My heart hit my throat. I rushed outside just in time to see Vivienne fumbling with the door of my truck. The key ring in her hand looked bulky, official. The HOA's master key, no doubt. But it didn't work. The lock didn't budge. "Hey," I shouted. "What do you think you're doing?" She jumped, eyes wide, caught in the act. This is routine inspection," she stammered, voice shaky. "No, you don't have permission to touch my property, not without notice, especially not my car." Her face flushed, the polished mask slipping, frustration mixed with panic. Without warning, she pulled out her phone. "I'm calling the police, trespassing and unauthorized vehicle access." I barely had time to respond before I heard the faint wail of sirens approaching down the street. Neighbors began to peek from windows, whispers fluttering like moths in the twilight. When the officers arrived, Vivienne repeated her claim, authoritative and insistent. But as they inspected the truck and questioned me, the truth was clear. She had no right to be there without explicit consent. The master key was meant for common areas, not personal vehicles. One officer looked at Vivienne with a raised eyebrow, then turned to me. "You're the owner?" I nodded. The other officer sighed. "Ma'am, we're placing you under arrest for trespassing and filing a false police report." Shock froze her in place. The neighbors gasped. Some whispered, "Finally." Others looked worried. As they handcuffed her, Vivienne's eyes locked with mine, cold, defeated, but defiant. I felt a strange mix of relief and unease. Relief that justice was served right then and there. Unease because this would only escalate things. Later, back inside, I sat by the oak bench in the backyard, the weight of the day pressing down like the thick summer air. That bench had seen decades of family stories, moments of peace amid chaos. Now, it felt like a witness to a new kind of battle. Lily ran up to me, clutching her favorite toy. "Daddy, why did the lady get handcuffed?" I smiled gently, ruffling her hair. "Sometimes, people forget the rules they're supposed to follow. But everyone has to play fair." She nodded thoughtfully, then scampered off to the swing set. The community was buzzing. Some neighbors congratulated me quietly, others looked away, afraid of stirring the pot. Vivian's arrest was a jolt, a public unmasking of the control she wielded so ruthlessly. But it wasn't a victory yet. The HOA's board was scrambling. Rumors swirled of lawsuits, counterclaims, and retaliation. That night, I sat with Mark and Lena, hashing out our next moves. Vivian's mistake gave us leverage, Lena said, eyes sharp behind her glasses, but the board won't back down without a fight. Mark nodded, still haunted but determined. She's rattled, but the others might tighten the screws. I looked around at the faces I trusted. This was no longer about parking fines or lawn decorations. It was a war for our homes, our dignity. We need airtight evidence, more than just the Master Key incident, I said. Emails, testimonies, recordings, we exposed the whole system. Lena tapped her laptop, pulling up encryption programs and audio tools. I can set up discrete recorders around common areas, maybe even near the bench. If they think they're being watched, they'll slip up. Mark swallowed hard. It's risky, but necessary, I said. If we don't act smart, they'll bury us under legal fees and fear. We worked late into the night, piecing together plans, drawing lines between whispers and proof. Outside, the wind rustled the oak leaves, a quiet reminder of what was at stake. This wasn't just a neighborhood dispute anymore. It was a fight to reclaim respect, to stand against a system that had forgotten its purpose. And I wasn't backing down. The basement was colder than I remembered, and the moment I flipped the light switch, the bulb flickered uncertainly before settling into a dim glow that barely pushed back the shadows. Dust hung in the stale air, swirling with every movement I made. The creak of the wooden floorboards beneath my feet felt louder than it should, as if the house itself was holding its breath. I had promised Mark I'd dig deeper into the family archives, hoping to find any scraps of information that could help unravel the HOA's long history of power plays. Maybe my grandfather had kept records nobody else knew about. Boxes lined the back wall, some stacked high and sealed with brittle tape, others half open with papers spilling out in faded piles. I knelt beside one and lifted the lid carefully. The smell of old paper hit me, musty but familiar. Inside were letters, newspaper clippings, and faded photographs. I pulled out a letter written in neat, flowing script, my grandfather's handwriting. Dated over 40 years ago, it spoke of neighbors banding together against an overbearing neighborhood association. My fingers traced the words slowly. We hold our homes not just as structures, but as memories and legacies. The words hit me with unexpected force. The same fight had been raging here long before me. Somehow, that made me feel less alone. I shifted some boxes and uncovered a rusted filing cabinet, its lock still intact. Years ago, my father had left me a set of old keys, saying, "You never know when you'll need these." Tonight, I was glad I kept them. The lock clicked open with a reluctant groan. Inside were stacks of yellowing meeting minutes, letters, and records from the HOA's early days. I flipped through the fragile pages, noticing scribbled notes in margins, cryptic references to special access, property inspections, and enforcement protocols. One document caught my eye. It was a detailed note about the master key, how it was intended for emergency use only, yet the board had been using it regularly, entering homeowners' properties without permission. My stomach twisted. This wasn't just about fines or parking tickets anymore. It was a deliberate, systematic violation of privacy and law. I pulled out my phone and switched on the recorder, reading passages aloud into the microphone. Every word counted. I needed to preserve this, to turn it into something undeniable. As the light flickered overhead, I felt a cold breeze creep through the cracked basement window. The house groaned as if warning me of the weight of the truth I was uncovering. Suddenly, a faint noise upstairs made me freeze. A door creaking, footsteps on the porch. My pulse quickened. Had someone come by unexpectedly? I quickly secured the papers in a waterproof folder and hurried upstairs, heart pounding. Later that night, Lena and Sarah gathered around my kitchen table. Lena's fingers danced across her laptop keyboard, decrypting files Mark had sent, while Sarah scanned legal documents, her brow furrowed in concentration. I spread the old meeting minutes and letters across the table, watching their faces carefully. "This is exactly what we need," Lena said, eyes gleaming. "A long history of abuse documented by their own hands. It's proof of pattern and intent. Courts love that." Sarah nodded slowly. The key is showing consistent behavior over time, not just isolated incidents. This could turn the tide in court. On the screen, Mark's face appeared, tired but determined. I'm sorry it took me so long to come forward. But what you found confirms everything I feared. We discussed strategy well into the night. The plan was clear. Build an airtight case, gathering testimonies, recording conversations, and preserving every shred of evidence. If Vivian and the board thought they could intimidate us into silence, they hadn't met the stubbornness that legacy and truth could inspire. Outside, the oak tree by the bench whispered in the night breeze, steadfast as ever, a silent witness to the battle we were about to wage. This wasn't just my fight anymore. It belonged to every neighbor who had ever felt powerless in the face of bullying. The truth was buried beneath years of silence, but we were digging it up, and once the light hit, nothing could hide. The next few days felt like walking through a storm without an umbrella. I was surrounded by piles of papers, digital files, and endless conversations with Lena and Sarah. Each new piece of evidence gave me a little more hope and a lot more headaches. Lena was the engine driving our tech side. She showed up at my house one morning with her backpack full of gadgets and a determined look. "We're gonna need cameras, microphones, stuff Vivian won't see coming," she said, unpacking like a spy preparing for a covert mission. I shook my head with a half smile. "Feels like we're gearing up for war." "Because we are," she replied. "And if you want to win, you need eyes and ears everywhere." Meanwhile, Sarah was busy mapping out legal strategies. I sat across from her one afternoon, the weight of every fine, every threat, every unseen violation pressing down like a stone on my chest. "We have a strong case," she said, sliding me a printed timeline of incidents, emails, and HOA notices. "But they'll hit back hard. Expect countersuits, intimidation. You ready for that?" The truth was, I wasn't sure. I looked out the window toward the oak bench, the silhouette of the tree's limbs framing the setting sun. That bench had seen better days, but it still stood strong, reminding me why I couldn't give up. One evening, Mark stopped by, his usual nervous energy replaced by something sharper. "I've been thinking," he started, fumbling with his hat. "There's more going on than just Vivian. Some board members want the power she has, but don't want to get their hands dirty. They might try to undermine you behind the scenes." The thought chilled me. The fight wasn't just against one person. It was against a system. I nodded slowly. "We need allies, people who've been hurt by this too." We started talking to neighbors more openly, cautiously. Some were eager to share their stories, others were still scared. The community was divided, fractured by fear and years of silent submission. Then came the small victories. A couple of neighbors agreed to let us install discreet recording devices near common areas. Others began documenting their own run-ins with the HOA, photographs of illegal fence removals, copies of fines issued without warning. I remember one afternoon, Lily asked to sit with me on the bench. She traced the rough wood with her fingers and said, "Daddy, why do you have to fight these people? Can't they just be nice?" Her innocent question hit me hard. "Sometimes, Princess," I said, pulling her close, "people forget how to be fair. But we have to remind them." She smiled, and I felt the weight lift just a bit. Back inside, Lena was analyzing audio clips we'd gathered, snippets of HOA meetings, Vivian's voice commanding, accusing. "We caught her bragging about keeping the neighborhood in line," Lena said, smirking. "She doesn't even try to hide it." Sarah was drafting legal letters, formal demands for transparency, cease and desist orders, warnings of impending lawsuits. Every document was another arrow in our quiver. But the pressure was growing. I got a call from one neighbor saying their mailbox had been vandalized after they spoke out. Another whispered about strange cars circling late at night. Vivian's network was fighting back, hard. Still, I refused to back down. One night, sitting alone by the oak bench, I thought about my dad. How he'd stood up for fairness all his life, how he never let fear stop him. The bench creaked softly beneath me, the air thick with summer heat and resolve. This was more than just property. It was family, it was justice. And I was ready to see it through, no matter the cost. If you've ever felt alone against a system that won't back down, you know this is just the beginning. Where are you watching from? Because what happens next will turn everything upside down. Mark's voice was quieter than usual when he called that evening. "Ethan, I can't stay silent anymore. I'd known this moment was coming, but hearing it still hit me in the chest. Mark wasn't just any neighbor. He'd been inside the board, part of the machinery we'd been fighting. "Talk to me," I said. He sighed, heavy with fear and something like relief. I'd been keeping emails from Vivienne and the others, proof of everything. Their plans to use the master key without consent, the fake complaints, the fines designed to break people. I leaned forward, heart pounding. "Can you send them?" "Yes, but I want to meet, face to face. I'm scared they'll suspect if it's all digital." We agreed on a quiet cafe, somewhere neutral. When Mark arrived, he looked tired, eyes darting nervously. He handed me a manila envelope stuffed with printouts, email threads, and meeting notes. This is what they don't want anyone to see," he said, voice low. I flipped through the documents, feeling the weight of their words. These weren't just complaints or warnings. They were a blueprint for intimidation and control. "I know you're scared," I said, "but this changes everything." Mark nodded. "I just hope it's enough." Back home, I spread the papers across the kitchen table. Lena was already there, her eyes sharp behind glasses, fingers poised on the keyboard. "We need to verify the emails, trace their origins, make sure there's no way they can claim forgery." Lena nodded. "I'll get on it. We'll cross-record with server logs, IP addresses." Sarah joined us shortly after, her calm presence steadying the room. "This evidence could force a major shakeup, but we have to be meticulous. The board will try to discredit every piece." We began plotting the next phase, a coordinated legal assault backed by community testimony and tech evidence. Meanwhile, word had started to spread. A handful of neighbors, once silent, were stepping forward with stories of harassment and unfair fines. Our group grew cautiously optimistic. But Vivienne was watching. I could feel it. One afternoon, I caught her surveying the neighborhood from across the street, eyes sharp beneath a wide-brimmed hat. She wasn't just angry, she was desperate. The oak bench in my backyard, where I often found quiet with Lily, became a silent witness to the mounting tension. I'd sit there, hands resting on the rough wood, thinking of the legacy I was fighting to protect. One evening, Mark confessed over coffee that his silence had been crushing him. I kept thinking, if I spoke up, I'd lose everything. But not speaking, that felt worse. I squeezed his hand. "You're doing the right thing. We're in this together." The fight wasn't just about rules anymore. It was about standing up to fear, reclaiming our community's soul. We worked late nights planning, collecting, strategizing, every email traced, every recording stored securely. The walls were closing in on the HOA board, and I could sense the panic in their moves. But we stayed steady. Because this wasn't just my fight, it was ours. The morning sunlight sliced through the blinds, casting slatted shadows across the kitchen table where Lena and I sat, eyes glued to the screen. Her fingers danced over the keyboard, pulling up live footage from the cameras she'd secretly installed around the neighborhood's common spaces. "Look at this," she whispered, zooming in on a figure skulking behind the Johnsons' fence. Vivienne. No knock, no notice, just moving like she owned the place. Her movements were slow but deliberate, like she was checking her territory, making sure everyone knew who ruled here. It was almost poetic in a dark way. Vivienne, queen of the HOA, prowling in the shadows. I felt a thrill. We'd caught her red hand. But catching her wasn't enough. The real fight was what came next. Later that day, Mark dropped by with news darker than the afternoon sky. "Vivienne's rallying the board," he said, face tight, "calling you the agitator, saying you're stirring up trouble." I ran a hand through my hair. Figures. She'll smear anyone who threatens her throne. Mark grimaced. "She's also warning neighbors, telling them fines will double if they keep speaking out." My blood boiled. It wasn't just a power play anymore. It was a reign of terror. I glanced toward the backyard, the oak bench bathed in late sunlight, shadows flickering across its worn surface. That bench had been there for decades, a silent witness to laughter, tears, and quiet family moments. Now, it felt like the last stronghold of everything worth fighting for. That evening, Lena and I set up a hidden microphone near the bench, a spot where neighbors often gathered, trusting the old oak's shade for conversation. If Vivienne or her minions tried their intimidation here, we'd have proof. Weeks crawled by, the tension in the neighborhood thickened like fog, neighbors whispering behind curtains, casting wary glances. But beneath that surface, our mountain of evidence grew. Videos of unauthorized entries, emails with incriminating language, recorded conversations dripping with menace. Then, one night, Lena's laptop chimed with a new file. My stomach tightened as I hit play. Vivian's voice spilled out loud and clear, brazen and unrepentant, boasting to a small gathering about how she kept the neighborhood in line and warning dissenters they'd pay the price. Lena leaned back, eyes wide. "This is it, the smoking gun." I nodded, heart pounding. Proof not just of abuse, but intent. Sarah was waiting when I got home the next day, calm, measured, but with a fire burning behind her eyes. "We can file. This evidence combined with Mark's emails and the recorded threats forms a near unassailable case. The board can't dodge it." I felt a mixture of relief and dread. Vivian wouldn't take this lying down. That afternoon, the backlash hit. My mailbox was slashed, threats smeared on neighbors' fences, a neighbor's tires mysteriously flattened. The message was clear: back off or pay. The HOA's claws were out. But something unexpected was happening. The community was waking up. Neighbors who'd stayed silent for years began stepping forward. Small gatherings sprouted, hushed but determined. And the oak bench, that weathered sentinel in my backyard, became a rallying point. One afternoon, I found a crowd assembled beneath its branches, faces bright with hope and resolve. "We're with you, Ethan," someone called. "It's time we took back our neighborhood." I swallowed the lump in my throat. This was no longer a solo fight, it was a movement. Vivian's web was tightening, but we had something stronger: truth, unity, and the fierce will to stand. The battle wasn't over, not by a long shot. But sitting there, hands resting on that familiar rough wood, I felt the weight of every family that had come before us whispering through the leaves. And I knew, this time, we'd win. The courtroom was thick with tension, the kind that presses down on your chest and makes every breath a little heavier. I sat beside Sarah, our stacks of evidence neatly arranged between us. It wasn't just paper and photos. It was months of quiet resistance, late nights, and whispered conversations that finally had a place here, in this sterile room where decisions carried real weight. Vivian entered with her usual entourage, lawyers in tailored suits, faces polished and unreadable. Her confident stride faltered just a little when our eyes met. There was no smirk this time, only a cold calculation, like she was measuring the distance between control and collapse. The judge called the court to order and the room fell silent. Sarah stood and began laying out our case with a clarity that made the hours of work worth every second. Emails with damning language, videos of unauthorized entries, recordings dripping with menace, all woven into a narrative of intimidation and abuse of power. Vivian's defense was textbook denial. She insisted the HOA acted within guidelines, accused us of forgery and harassment, and painted me as the agitator disrupting the peace. But Sarah was ready for every claim. She countered with precise timestamps on emails, metadata confirming the authenticity of recordings, and a timeline that left no room for doubt. One by one, neighbors took the stand, faces once hidden behind curtains now brave and clear under the courtroom lights. There was Mrs. Delgado, the elderly woman who recounted Vivian's unannounced intrusion into her backyard. Her voice shook, but she spoke with quiet dignity. "I felt violated," she said, eyes glistening, "like my home wasn't mine anymore." Then came Tom, who described the fine slapped on his property for trivial things like paint color and lawn height. He told of the fear that gripped him, how he hesitated to challenge the board, worried about what might come next. Mark's testimony was the most nerve-wracking. He described secret emails, covert meetings where Vivian's plans were hatched. His hands trembled, voice wavering, but he refused to back down. They wanted to control us, he said, not protect us. Throughout it all, I caught glimpses of Lily sitting with my sister. Her small fingers toyed with a worn teddy bear, the same one I'd hugged as a kid, sitting beneath the oak bench in our yard. That bench, miles away, but always in my heart, was a symbol of the legacy I was fighting to protect. Vivian's defense team tried to discredit every witness, but the weight of truth was too strong. Then, the turning point. The judge allowed us to play audio of Vivian herself. Her voice was clear, sharp, as she boasted to a group about keeping the neighborhood in line and warned that dissenters would pay the price. Gasps echoed softly in the courtroom. Some people exchanged looks, others sat frozen. I swallowed hard. This was the moment. The mask slipped away. The judge called for a brief recess. Outside, murmurs spread like wildfire. Reporters crowded the halls, eager for any scrap of information. Lily tugged at my sleeve. "Daddy, is this going to end soon?" I smiled, bending down to meet her eyes. "We're getting there, kiddo. We just have to keep going." Back inside, closing arguments came. Sarah's voice was steady, powerful, weaving together every piece into a story of courage against injustice. She spoke not just to the court, but to every homeowner watching, every person who'd felt powerless. The judge thanked both sides and set a date for the verdict. Waiting for that day was brutal. Each tick of the clock felt like a challenge. That night, I sat on the oak bench beneath a sky strewn with stars. The breeze rustled the leaves softly, like a quiet promise. The fight had come this far, but the journey was far from over. Still, for the first time in months, I felt something new, a glimmer of hope. If you've ever faced a fight that felt bigger than yourself, you know the waiting is the hardest part. Where are you watching from? Because what's coming next will change everything. The day of the verdict arrived with a weight that pressed down on the entire neighborhood. Even the air felt thick, like the storm was holding back before the inevitable release. At the community center, where neighbors had gathered before heading to the courthouse, conversations buzzed with nervous energy. I saw familiar faces, some bright with hope, others shadowed by uncertainty. The fight had shifted from legal papers to shared breath and shared fate. I sat with Lily on my lap, her fingers gripping mine tightly. She looked up, eyes wide. "Daddy, will they listen?" I smiled softly, brushing a strand of hair from her face. "They have to, we made sure of that." Inside the courtroom, the judge took his seat. The room fell into a hush as the clerk read out the decision. Every eye locked on Vivian, whose polished facade seemed thinner now, strained with tension. The judge's voice was steady but heavy. After careful consideration of the evidence, testimonies, and arguments presented, this court finds the HOA board guilty of exceeding their authority and violating homeowners' rights. A ripple of gasps and whispers passed through the room. Vivian's face drained of color. Her lawyers exchanged hurried, grim looks. The judge continued. Further, the court orders immediate reforms, restrictions on unauthorized property access, transparent enforcement protocols, and compensation for affected homeowners. Relief surged through me like a wave. I caught Mark's eye across the room. His lips trembled, eyes bright with unshed tears. Outside, the crowd erupted into quiet cheers and embraces. Neighbors who had once feared speaking now smiled with cautious pride. Later, at a neighborhood gathering under the sprawling branches of the oak tree, I watched as neighbors shared stories, not just of past hardships, but of newfound hope. Lily ran to the bench, plopping down with her teddy bear. I sat beside her, the rough wood familiar beneath my fingers. "It's over, right?" she asked. "Not completely," I said, "but this is the start of something better." A few neighbors came forward, thanking me for standing up. Some admitted they'd been too scared to fight. Others spoke of plans to rebuild the community spirit. I realized then that this wasn't just about rules or fines, it was about reclaiming dignity, safety, and trust. Vivian had fallen, but the work was just beginning. We needed to heal, to come together, to ensure no one ever felt powerless again. The oak tree's leaves whispered above us, a quiet witness to battles fought and peace earned. As the sun dipped low, casting golden light over the yard, I felt a deep sense of closure. This neighborhood, our home, was finally on the path to healing. And I was ready to help lead the way. The air in the community hall was thick with anticipation, tension rolling through the packed room like an electric current. It wasn't just any HOA board meeting. This was the reckoning everyone had been waiting for. Neighbors who had been silent for years filled the seats, their eyes sharp, their hands clenched or nervously gripping coffee cups. The same faces that once shrank away from confrontation now carried a quiet, fierce determination. Vivian entered late, her usual confident stride replaced by stiff steps. The smile she wore was fragile, forced like a mask barely holding together. She glanced around, her eyes settling on me for a brief moment, cold and calculating, before quickly shifting away. I could feel the weight of the room pressing down on her, and for the first time, I saw cracks beneath the polished exterior. The chairperson called the meeting to order. Formalities were brief, the room was ready for truth, and there was no hiding from it. I stood, swallowing the lump in my throat, and faced the crowd. "That bench out there," I began, nodding toward the window where the oak tree's sprawling branches framed the weathered wood. "It's more than just a bench. It's a symbol of legacy. My grandfather's legacy, my daughter's memories, and a place where neighbors have found comfort and connection for generations." A hush fell. I took a deep breath. What happened here isn't just about rules. It's about respect, trust, and community. Over the past months, we've uncovered evidence of intimidation, unauthorized entries into private property, and fines designed to silence us. I held up a thick folder. Emails from Vivienne and the board, recorded conversations where they boast about keeping control, and testimonies from those of you who felt bullied and unheard. Vivienne's lips twitched, ready to interrupt, but I raised a hand. "Please, let the community speak." Mark was next, stepping forward despite trembling hands. "I was part of the board. I saw it all. Secret meetings, plans to use the master key without permission, a campaign to scare us into silence. I was scared to speak up, terrified actually. But today, I'm here to stand with you." His words rippled through the room, some nodding in agreement, others whispering support. Vivienne tried to regain control, her voice rising as she denied the allegations, painting herself as the victim of a smear campaign. But the evidence was too strong. The emails, the recordings, and the unified voices of the community spoke louder than her protests. Then came an unexpected moment. Suddenly, the front door clicked shut and locked with a definitive thud. Vivienne's eyes widened in shock. A neighbor from the back of the room held up a key, a small smirk playing on his lips. "Looks like the queen of this neighborhood just got locked out." Laughter erupted, breaking the tension and washing over the room like a cleansing wave. Vivienne's face paled, the defiance in her eyes flickering as she realized the tide had turned. The chairperson called for a vote. The room was unanimous. Vivienne was removed as HOA president, and new measures were immediately put in place. Strict rules against unauthorized property access, clear procedures for enforcing community guidelines, and safeguards to protect homeowners from harassment. As the meeting adjourned, the room buzzed with a renewed sense of hope. Neighbors gathered, sharing stories, shaking hands, and expressing gratitude. The unity that had once seemed impossible was now tangible. Outside, Lily tugged at my sleeve, her voice soft but hopeful. "Daddy, does this mean the bench is safe now?" I knelt beside her, eyes meeting hers. "It means this neighborhood belongs to all of us. The bench is more than safe. It's a symbol of everything we're fighting to protect." The sun dipped low, casting long shadows that stretched across the yard. The oak tree's leaves whispered in the evening breeze, a silent testament to battles fought and victories earned. Though the road ahead was still long, healing had begun, and surrounded by family and friends, I felt the steady, quiet power of a community reclaimed. The days after the board meeting felt strangely light, like the neighborhood had finally exhaled after holding its breath too long. But rebuilding trust wasn't instant. It was slow, careful work, like tending to a garden long neglected. The oak bench in our yard became the quiet center of it all. I caught neighbors sitting there, talking softly about the future, about community, not just rules or restrictions. Sometimes Lily and I joined them, her laughter weaving back into the space, stitching joy where fear had lived. One afternoon, Mark stopped by, carrying a box of old photos and letters from long before Vivienne's reign. "Thought this might help," he said, setting it gently on the table. "Reminders of why this place mattered." I opened the box carefully, pulling out yellowed pictures of block parties, children playing in the streets, neighbors gathered around barbecue pits. The history wasn't just in the bench or the trees, it was in us, in every story shared and every hand extended. Lena, always the pragmatist, helped me install new security systems, ones that respected privacy but kept everyone safe. Sarah worked with the new board to draft community guidelines, balancing order with fairness. We'd won the battle, but the war for true community was ongoing. Lily climbed onto the oak bench one evening, her small hands tracing the worn wood. "Daddy, do you think the bench remembers?" I chuckled softly. "I think it remembers everything, and so do we." The bench had become more than a symbol. It was proof that roots run deep, that legacies can't be erased by fear or power. As night settled, I stood beside it, looking up at the stars scattered above. The fight had tested me in ways I never expected. It had shown me the strength in standing up, the courage in community, and the power of legacy. Justice wasn't just about winning a case or ousting one person. It was about reclaiming dignity for myself, my family, and every neighbor who deserved to call this place home without fear. And that was a victory worth every struggle. If you've ever faced unfairness or felt powerless against systems meant to protect you, share your story below. Where are you watching from? Your voice matters, and together we can turn silence into strength.